Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be continuing our video series on the fundamentals of periodization, and this one's going to be on phase potentiation. Essentially, phase potentiation is structuring the year into phases. However, we can do this in a particular manner in order to ensure peak performance when the athlete or team requires it. So we can sequence the phases in order to peak our athlete at a certain time of the year. And we do this by basically structuring phases so that each phase builds on the previous one. So the first phase would set up the second phase for success, and the second phase would set up the third phase for success, and that will continue until we are actually at our peak. So what should we plan when we are considering our phase potentiation? So we have three general phases that we can use in our training. So the first is the accumulation phase, which is essentially when we're accumulating high volumes while keeping the intensity low to moderate. As we can see here on this graph, the blue lines representing volume. So over an accumulation phase, we would want our volume to slowly go up while our intensity maintains. We then have an intensification phase, which is basically when we have low to moderate volumes, but we're actually progressing in intensity. So if this was an intensification phase on this graph here, the volume staying sort of low to moderate while the intensity is slowly rising. We can then have a realization or a peaking phase, which is basically when we have very high intensities and very low volumes. And the way we'd plan that would be to have the intensity rising up while the volume is actually going down. And what that's going to do is that is going to keep our intensity as high as it possibly can while minimizing fatigue by reducing volume. So what don't we want to plan when we're considering phase potentiation? So the first thing is exercise selection. You don't need to worry about that at this moment. And then exact volumes and intensities of exercises. So we don't need to worry about that. We know generally our volumes and intensities based on the phases that we're going to select, but the exact volumes and intensities we're going to use are not going to be planned. And the reason for that is because plans are very likely to change throughout the year. So if we plan the entire volumes and intensities of the year, it's probably not going to pan out in reality. So in the end product, this is what we get. So this picture here was from the previous video on creating the annual plan, and then I've added this section here. So essentially we've already got when our games are for the season. This is, for example, for a team sport athlete. We have our testing periods. We know when our season is, when our pre-seasons are. And now we have to establish when we need to be at our peak. So if we have a look at these yellow squares here, we can see the darker squares represent more important games and the lighter squares represent less important games. So as we can see at these points here, we have quite a few important games, and sort of around here towards the end of the season we have a few important games. That might be the finals period for some sports. Whereas in the preseason and off-season periods we don't actually have any games, so we probably don't need to be at our best. So during those periods we can use them to accumulate volume, which is going to increase our work capacity and build our tolerance for the subsequent phases. So we can use those periods to accumulate volume, and then when we need to perform better, we can put our intensification phases in. So maybe a phase like here at the start of the season we have quite a few important games. We then might have another long accumulation phase during the season in order to make sure we don't lose all our adaptations from the previous accumulation phase. And we can intelligently put that in the plan where we don't have too many important games, because we're probably not going to perform quite at our best at this point. And then when we really need to be at our peak, we might put a realization phase, which again, as previously mentioned, is when the volume is dropping down while the intensity is rising. So we're really going to be sharp at that point. However, we can't put too many realization phases throughout the year, because we then don't have the time to build our work capacity and build tolerance with these volumes of an accumulation phase. Then during the off-season periods, if the athlete's away or on holidays or not with the club or the team, they're probably not going to have any phases planned for that period of time. And that's it for this presentation, guys. Thanks for watching and hopefully you got something out of it. Make sure to stay tuned to this YouTube channel for the next videos in this video series. If you're a curious individual who's interested in learning more about sports performance training, you can find Flow High Performance on Facebook and on Instagram. On these platforms, you'll find hundreds of these research infographics, which are the latest research summarized into these easy to understand pictures so that you can stay up to date with the latest research without actually having to go into the journal yourself and reading the entire article.